Welcome to In the Calm. I'm your host, Georgiana Alexander. You guys, I am super excited to welcome this really special soul to the podcast In the Calm. Case Warwick is here with us, and there are so many different directions that I know we're going to want to dive into. But before we get into this juicy, playful energy, talking all about embodiment and resiliency, I want to give you a quick introduction to the incredible Case Warwick. Case, welcome to the show. She's a mentor, a coach, and the CEO of Embodied Business, as well as the host of the Embodied Business podcast. Case coaches 6- and 7-figure entrepreneurs and women stepping into their thought leadership and into their next chapters. So welcome, Case. So excited to have you here.
Thank you. I am actually so excited to be here. You came on my podcast the other day and it was just magic. So I'm excited to open that vortex again. So good.
That was such a fun episode. I can't wait for all of you guys to hear. Actually, you know what would be great is I'm going to link the episode in this podcast as well, so that way you guys can check in, because it was super juicy. Something that struck me and getting to know you, and I just feel like our lives pinged and came together, and it's just been this really fun dance of getting to know one another and our circles crossing and that sort of thing. Your story of resiliency and the many chapters that you have lived. I feel like not many of us, I can speak to this as well, because as we've gotten to know each other, I think, like there's countless chapters I've lived, but I feel like not many people just dive into these extreme chapters, of lived experience. And so I'm really excited to get into some of the nuances of where that led you to, but I would love it if you would share with us a little bit of your story. I mean, tapping into the story of overcoming abuse and domestic violence relationships, and so many paths you've taken in your life of achievement and growth and business, and that you're a 5-1 generator. We love our human design here. And so really stepping into that overachiever, I'd say, of the 5-1 generator, and then how that all just kind of kept blowing up and kept blowing up, one chapter after the next chapter, coming undone, so then you could rebuild it again to fully step into your embodiment. Just take us back a little bit of like the story of resiliency for you.
Yeah, well, I feel like it's a really big one. So I'm going to give you the lighter version, so that way you guys can piece the puzzle together even more if you wish. My story literally started when I was like 5 years old. My parents were actually drug addicts, and it was a pretty tumultuous upbringing, right? So we had domestic violence, we had, lots of different things that come in with drugs, as in like, drug dealing, all the sorts of things. And so I spent a lot of my younger years moving schools, moving different spaces, and constantly being on the move, because, with that kind of life, there is no permanency, because people aren't grounded. They're not rooted in themselves. And so I remember one year I went to like 8 different schools within 1 year, and it was a lot. So I guess my entire journey was really looking for safety, because I'd had so much adaptation at such a young age. When I was 13, we moved to the country so my mum could clean herself up, and like we could really build as a family again. And it was the best thing that we ever did as a family. And so that's where my safety and things started really coming online. But for me, I knew I wanted something really, really big. So I actually joined the military. I was like, I want to serve. I want to be of service. I want to help humanity. And I don't ever want people to experience what I personally experienced growing up. And I thought that was through the military. And anyway, long and behold, 18 months in, I'm getting medically discharged because I have a back injury where I can't walk properly. So just to give a quick diagnosis, I had L4, L5 bulging disc on, I had stress fractures all through my hips, and I had sacroiliac joint dysfunction. So if you're a woman and you know how intense that is, I could not walk properly. I was constantly limping. I couldn't wear the shoes that they had in the military. And it was to be really honest, it was the most challenging period of my life, because I thought that was my path. I thought that's where I was going. And so I went into this deep depression and anxiety back and forth for years. And, I remember one day, my story really flipped. I was with my ex and I was engaged very young. And at this time, I'd also, whilst I was in the military, been diagnosed infertile. So there was lots of things where I thought, I'm never going to get anything I want in life. Like that was kind of the mentality I was viewing the world through. I had this dress that I put on, and you know how like everyone's got their fat dress, like the dress that you're like so you wear when you don't feel good because you know it still looks good, and it's like, you know, it's like your frumpy dress. Anyway, I went to put that on one day, and my ex at the time said to me, "You can't wear that." And I was like, "Wait, what?" And he was like, I was like, "Why?" And he goes, "You're too fat for it." So I'd been gaining all this weight due to my lack of mobility and all the things. And in that moment, it was like, because I knew it was truth, it hit me so hard. And I just broke down and I dropped to the floor and I just started crying. It was like he looked at me and he was quite harsh how he did it, but it was almost like God speaking through him at the same time. Like he was like, "Well, you can cry about it or you can do something about it." And so with that, I was like, "Oh, like," you know, and so I got up and I went and joined a boot camp. And I remember going there and being like, "Look, I can barely move, but I see that you guys do some, you know, punching and boxing and stuff. Can I just do like what I can, like just jump in where I can so I can do something?" Within maybe 12 months, I think it was, of working with this guy, I'll give Matt a shout out. He was absolutely incredible in my recovery and helping me. I was doing team triathlons. I was like really expanding and able to gain back my body and my confidence with my body. And I had so many people being like, "Oh my God, you should be a personal trainer." Anyway, to link back to the military, that's what I always wanted to do in the military. So I was like, well, if I can't do this in the military, I can do it on my own. And so that was the undoing of that first relationship, because I wanted to, you know, become a personal trainer. And he was like, "No, you're not allowed to study. How can we do that? We don't have the money." And so I went behind his back, got a loan. And then, you know, everything just started unfolding because I was growing as a person and he didn't want me to grow. He wanted me to be pretty much just like move around with him with the military and not have my own life. So fast forward the next like 5 or 6 years, like 3 years it took me to actually start that business because I was still so conditioned and scared. But once I finally stepped into personal training and really having a go with life, I stepped into it from such a 3D space of hustle, go, do the thing, like just make it work. Like, and I constantly burnt myself out. And I wasn't getting where I wanted to go in business. I was working like 4 jobs to try and make my business work. And it was just a lot. Like, and I'd have friends who like had kids and stuff, and they're like, "Oh, I'd hate to see what you like when you have kids if you're complaining of life being like this." And, you know, I had no concept of what it meant to trust anything because I was constantly in control. Fast forward to then going to attend my first self-development experience. I sat in the room with like 200 people and I was like, "Oh, these people are like me." Like, oh my God, like there's people who think like me, that think outside the box. And what I realized in that moment was no one comes into the gym because they want to exercise. Everyone can exercise in their own right. It was everything else in between getting in the way that was stopping them from honoring themselves, honoring their body, being with what they needed to be with. And so it was like a natural progression of me moving down the line of this. And eventually I got into this space where I was constantly in toxic relationships through this time. I just want to highlight, like, I was dating really unhealthy places and spaces and with men. And anyway, I got to this place where I really started to understand feminine and masculine dynamics and how I had attracted all this. And I was like, really like, you know what, I'm going to do this, because I'd gone on and I'd studied like NLP, hypnosis, like all the mind stuff, right?
Right.
And I'd become very equipped in different modalities and different techniques. And I was like, "Oh, I'm going to teach a course on masculine and feminine. Like that's going to be my thing. And I'm going to get women to wake themselves up into their full feminine essence." Right. And so this is as I'd started stepping into the coaching space, and I'd started running in-person events, and I was getting a lot of traction. I was getting people come in, and I made this prayer one night where I was like, "God, please show me the way. Give me the experience so I can hold the women that I'm about to walk with life in." Like, because I knew I had a really big calling. What I didn't realize was in that prayer, I just welcomed in my worst fucking nightmare. Sorry.
To say, when you set the intentions and you ask for the answers, get ready because they come every single time.
Yeah, every time. Anyway, within a couple of weeks, I had met this guy and he just seemed straight off the bat amazing. Like he was a little bit younger than me. So I was like, no, 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 at first, you're too young for me. And then I was like no matter what I did, I couldn't get rid of this guy. He was just obsessed with me in the best way, what it felt like. And I was like, oh my God, like this guy's blowing all my beliefs around. Like I can't have a business and a relationship because that's what I'd walked away with from my previous relationship. I was like, maybe this could work. It moved really fast. Like within 2 months, I was living with him. It was like I had this moment right before I moved in with him being like, this isn't right. This isn't it. And I denied my intuition. We move in. First night we're there, I'm unpacking my stuff. And he's like I'm literally putting the spoons and stuff in the drawer. So he comes up to me and he goes, oh, do you mind if I go to the pub? And I'm like, just moved in. Like, can we just have one night here together? And he's like, well, you're here now. And in that moment, my whole stomach dropped. I was just, and I started crying and I was like, you know what, just go. I didn't want to be controlling because I knew all the feminine things, right? Like I knew how men needed their space and freedom and all that. I was crying. We had this like little argument and he left and anyway, he came back and I was like, sorry, I've been controlling and all these sorts of things. And what actually started happening in that relationship was I was trying so hard to be the picture perfect feminine woman that I was denying my intuition so much. And I was downplaying my desires. I was not connected into what I actually needed. And it ended up coming out. He was a closet alcoholic and gambler. I had literally just attracted my father in, like, from who he was when I was growing up. And it got to the point where one night I had pulled him out of like the gutter, literally, to get into the car because he was so drunk he passed out in the gutter out the front of a pub. And that night ended in domestic violence. By this time, I had ruined my business. Like I had 3 clients on the book, which back in the day with personal training, that was $180 coming in a week, right? Like I had 3 clients. My network marketing business had gone out the window. There's so many pieces that I just had let go to the side because my mental state was so like just distorted because I was trying so hard to fix him. He had come done NLP. He had done all the things with me and still this was playing out. It wasn't changing. At the time, after this happened, a good friend of mine, he was like, you're going to come and live with me. I was like, I don't have money to pay rent. He's like, I don't care. You don't have to pay for anything. You're just going to come and live with me and you're going to get yourself sorted. He was like, I don't want you to go. And I was like, look, let's just live separately and we'll figure it out. But that was my way of getting out safely. And so I moved in with him and within a month completely had closed all chapters with that ex. But what I'd learned through that time was like, you know, even though I'd experienced it as a young woman, like young girl watching my mother go through it, thinking, and then actually experiencing it was totally different world. So this is what kind of started to open my viewpoint of like textbook learning versus actually knowing something. All this time I'm trying to change him. I'm trying to get it right. Like, because I thought I knew better, like it just wasn't working with the information I'd been handed with all my studies and stuff like that. So long story short, I went on to leave him. And I committed to a whole year of just being with myself and working with myself. And I signed up to work with these coaches who were really just beautiful and like connected holistically, the quantum, the physical, all the pieces. And so in a really short space of time, I cleaned up a lot of my world. And on that same course was my now partner. I didn't actually know that, he was then like it. I remember seeing a Facebook Live of him in the group and being like, oh yeah, he's cool. But that was kind of it. And then we met physically in person at Tony Robbins. We're both in the VIP thing, like maybe 6 months later. And I was like, oh, that's that guy from that course. Like, I was like, fuck, he's way hotter in person. Like, I was like having this whole connection. I was like, who is this guy? I was just so physically drawn to him. And I remember saying to one of my girlfriends, I'm like, I don't know what it is about that guy, but he's going to be in my life in some way. She was like, yeah, there's something between you two. And mind you, my partner is the most awkwardly shy person in the whole world that cannot read a book or when a woman is flirting with him, right? So it was like, it was so funny because I was like having to be quite forward with him. I just said to him, I was like, I really want to know you. And he was like, I want to know you too. Long story short, we're on a date that night after Tony Robbins. And it was just like, because we met in the vortex, everything started moving really fast. Within like the next 6 weeks, I had made a decision to start to change my life and to move with him. And then I also knew I had to then move states to be with him because we were interstate and all this stuff. And so within 3 months, I had closed down my personal training physical business, moved into, coaching women fully online, made more money than I'd made the entire year before within that time. And, we were starting to like really heal some really, really big stuff. But the most crazy thing was like within 8 months of being together, I was pregnant with my son after a previous infertility diagnosis.
Wow.
And yeah, it was just crazy. Like, and now, everything's just gotten better and better and better and better and better. Like my life now is like, he's nearly 4 now. So, it might have been a little bit longer, 9 months, we might have been pregnant. But anyway, we've been together for just over 5 years now. And, it's crazy, absolutely crazy
And
when
just
you
got
start.
engaged.
Yes, I don't have the ring on right now because it's getting resized, but yes,
Congratulations.
just got engaged. Thank you. So exciting. Like, all of this has accumulated in such a powerful way. Like even seeing my family in the work because of me choosing to be in the work as well. It's just been huge. Like, and because both him and I are such a stand for being a vessel of God, essentially, and not from a religious concept, but from a space of like the divine is always working through. And, having my family then take that on as well and starting to heal the ripples of what happened in my childhood, and different things. It's been a really cool journey.
Wow. I've known a good bit of your story, but so many pieces for me, like hearing it in this context and the way that you're describing it, like the pieces that really stand out that it's like I knew about you, but then hearing it in this different way is like you knew what you wanted to show up for with the masculine and the feminine and the healing before you actually knew what that meant, before you
Mm,
could live it, before you could embody it, before you could try it out. And that was something that we've talked about that really struck me about you is the way that you've shifted this lens of what the work means for you. I mean, you're the typical like overachiever, I've got to get all the accreditations, all the certifications, like do all the things that are going to equate success in my life, and they kept failing you and falling apart for you. But when you set the intention to step into the calling that you knew, which was the empowerment of the masculine feminine, it showed up
mm,
in your life in a really big way and let you heal what you didn't even know you needed to heal. You were thinking that you knew the feminine, and then to stand and then like really like, this idealized version of what feminine is. And our feminine embodiment is so different than that
mm.
idealized version of feminine, right? Like I get caught in that so often. Like I'm super feminine, but I'm more like the warrior feminine. I'm the
Yeah,
priestess
same.
feminine, really strong. And I think so many of us are. I mean, we're birth portals, whether we choose to birth children or not. We are constantly birthing through the universe in our
Mm,
systems and in that programming of how our bodies function and exist. And so with that, like us choosing embodiment in just one idealized state of what that looks like completely cuts us off and blocks us from everything else that's possible. And in that moment of
mm.
decision and intention, you open that doorway for yourself and everything changed.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because I speak a lot of the same things that you just shared then. And, I see so much like polarity teachings and all those sorts of things online. And having brought my baggage into my current relationship, like knowing how differently I have actually worked through it as opposed to what the textbook says, like it's been mind-blowing. And I have to give a shout out to one of my mentors here, Preston Smiles and Alexi Panos, two of them actually, because after I met my partner, he actually was like, I want you, like, I was like, oh, I really like this Alexi chick. She's coming to Australia. She's really cool. And he was like, yeah, go. I want you to go. Like, they're my mentors. And that was where it bridged the gap from mind to body for me because, our mind can be clouded by our ego, can be clouded by our own darkness, limitations, historical and societal beliefs. But what that was really for me was the permission slip to move beyond that, get in the body and actually let divine move through because every single time I was like getting in my own way, like essentially. And, I think when we start to look at the feminine aspect of like what actually is the feminine, like the women who I know who are deeply embodied in it are exactly what you've said, right? Like
Right.
we can be soft and playful, but we're also super direct and know what we desire and are willing to go after it because that's the power of creation, like birthing. And as you said, like we are literally a portal for life. We are the one thing that connects the spirit world, universal God intelligence from nothing to create human form. And when we
Just
go
walking
from
around, acting normal about it all, just day to day, like no bigs.
yeah, it's crazy. Like when you look at it from that lens and that concept of just how much can shift through a woman's body when she allows herself to access it fully.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I was really excited to get into conversation with you about, as well as this new way of thinking about embodiment. I mean, this is something that you coach and mentorship, and this is something you and I have talked about is like, for me, I'm a 3-5 projector. I astral travel. I'm in and out of body. I've almost died. Like that's my normal world, right? And so I've even shared, like I had this sense of guilt around, guilt and pressure, I would say, around feeling, oh, I'm not embodied. I'm not like
Mm,
embodied like this person. And then it's so ridiculous because when I really thought about that, like what does embodiment mean, right? Like does it mean, am I saying I'm not grounded? Well, that's not true because I'm really a rooted person. I'm very
mm,
reliable. I'm accountable for what I say I'm going to do. I'm grounded in where I stand and what that means to me. So what is it I'm saying? Do I not do rituals or practice or connect with the earth and nature? Well, no, I do all of those things. It's because I live so much in a lightness and in and out of body place that somehow this idealized version of what embodiment meant to me, even though when I really started to like check mark the details, I was like, well, I do all those things. Like, what the
yeah.
fuck is it that I'm not doing that I'm giving myself guilt over? And that's why it's so valuable to look at things through a different lens, right? To ask those questions and set that intention because embodiment can mean so much. Like embodiment for me, I now realize is being the higher perspective, being the bird's eye view, floating around, that is embodiment, being in motion. That feels better to me and feeling that flow and that air than whatever idealized version of embodiment that I was holding on to
Mm.
before. They're like, I don't even know what it was. Like now I can't even pinpoint it because I did a clearing on it. I'm like, oh, well, whatever, it doesn't matter. But I think there's something to that, like this conversation that you and I were having about where can we like shift our lens of embodiment, especially when it comes to owning our power, owning our presence, our entrepreneurial journey, our businesses, our creation. How does that show up for you in your coaching?
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of ways that are coming through. So I'm just gonna like presence the first thing that's really loud is like for me, embodiment is integrity. If I say to you, I'm gonna show up at 5, like
I feel
as you
like
said
all the
about being,
bells just went off like ding 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 ding.
yeah, like it's like how
Yes.
do you hold that?
Love that.
And it's not saying that you're not gonna be human in the processes, but it's like if you're not gonna show up on time, being like owning it straight away, be like apology, like just like I was like, oh, I'm sorry I was late, and you're like you're literally right on time, like you know what I mean? Like it's literally how you hold yourself in spaces. There's a nuance to it because a lot of people who are in our world that do work, with different dimensions and play on a different like frequency with how we actually allow people to, work with us and all those sorts of things. There's a little bit of danger that can happen, right? And so what I often see and what I often work with is women who are not actually playing powerfully with divine, they're actually dissociating it and calling it divine. And so it's like when there's
Yes.
not, yeah,
I think
like
you just
when,
need to say that again because that was like just so it like really clarifies this point, like putting
yeah.
it
So
outside of yourself, right?
yeah. Yeah, like so a lot of people are like, oh, it's just off meditating, getting the answers, or they'll be like, oh, I'm just waiting for God, or I'm just waiting for an answer. All of that are like they're all dissociation patterns because it's also outside of self. Like for those of us who are deeply connected, we also know that we are a particle of God. It's all coming through us. It's not separate. And so it's like when you're playing on that playing field of like, how are you? I've been in experiences where, someone would be called out on a pattern or something like that, and they've immediately gone into light language. And it's like, hold on, get back in the body. Because whilst that might be a great experience for you to start to like think that you're like getting it, your body's still running the pattern, right? So you can't beat your biology. So you might be great at getting downloads, but where's your implementation in life? Where are things that, like, just say, for example, if you're in meditation, you feel really good, you feel really clean, you're getting all the answers. But then you go into a relationship and you're still acting out as the rebellious teenager from when you were like 14 and, wanting a certain like level of acceptance and love. That's the key piece here is like, and I used to do this myself a lot, right? Like I was really good at like tapping in, connecting, doing all the things, and then my partner would receive the worst version of me. And so it's like the embodiment is like, how do you show up when no one's watching? How are you for the people who aren't in your business or online or watching you from the outside lens? Because if you're not the same person in person as you are in other places, there's an integrity gap there. And so it's not necessarily saying it's wrong, it's just noticing it for yourself, like noticing where things are. Like even this morning I'm doing a group presentation for some stuff that I'm doing right now. I was highly charged. Like my body was like I'm so fucking angry because we're not working cohesively and I could have been like, oh, this is all here for me, this is light and love and blah blah blah, and there's an element of that that's true. However, I needed to express what was happening in my body so I could actually have a clear channel. Most people, they get so caught up in like, I've just got to look what's for me, and they miss the cue of what's actually happening in their body, because your body is always talking to you. It holds the physical frequency of what you are emitting and what you're being with. So if someone doesn't know, like if they're constantly being like, just say hypothetically, they trying to give an actual real-time tangible result, right? Like just say someone cheated on someone in a relationship, right? Hypothetically, this is worst case like scenario type vibes, right? But just say they did it, right? But when that person then left the relationship, the next person went on to meet the most beautiful person that they'd ever met. And they were like, oh, that happened for me, so I can meet that person, right? Yes. And that person who got cheated on may still hold the charge of, I'm really hurt and I don't trust women, right? Or I don't trust men, or whoever it is that cheated. And so it's like, when you know how to access those pieces to clear it, that pattern no longer presents itself in the next relationship of you not trusting, of you not doing a thing. That way you can actually receive the purity, the energy of this other person that's coming in, as opposed to something else. Does that make sense when I say this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would say like receivership is such a big part of this, because what we're receiving when we're hurt, when we go through different experiences, is we take in the embodiment, the story, the energy, the frequency of whatever that other person has done. That's like typical trauma response as well, that, like
Yeah.
you take on a good bit of that story. And going back to your story of even in early childhood with
Mm.
where you had all these experiences, but you didn't know to clear that frequency and that energetic story out of your system. It's like it was just running in operation. It was a tab that was open and playing out and informing every other part of your life. And so you can be embodied, but as you said, if you're not showing up in the world, like, and when you start showing up, I would say, in those places of authentic embodiment, the old stories of pieces that are still kind of there and stuck with you or holding on to you or attached, that you're attached to or that are attached to you, they start rubbing. Just like,
Mm.
you said when you set that intention of wanting to step into your feminine, and then the shit hit the fan, everything came up and started shifting and unlocking. It's when you start really stepping into your own embodiment, then the frequency starts rubbing externally all the pieces that aren't aligned. And that's really, I think, the entry points of saying, great,
Mm.
this is the work, this is the good stuff to get into, and really
Mm.
letting go of the association of what reality you're looking into, what
Mm.
perspective you're living through.
Totally. And to add to that as well, it's like we only attract experiences because we literally are operating on the same frequency as that, right? So when we talk about it from a body perspective, our body emits a wave, like a frequency wave at the base of our spine. And so if that wave that we're emitting is holding guilt, is holding shame, is holding hurt, is holding stories of I'm not good enough, no one's going to love me, I will never be paid for what I desire, people are going to constantly come in. Like I hear this a lot. I get clients who are like, I can't charge that. And then it's like, well, hold on a second, let's clean this up. And then suddenly they're getting clients like just out of nowhere being like, I just want to throw money at you, because they may have had an attachment to it. And if you think about it too, like in our base of our spine, that's our safety point, right? Like that's where all our support systems, all our networks, everything accumulates to, because that's where we also hold how safe we are in the body, right? Like a lot of women who have had, you know, and this is a bit of a trigger warning just to FYI, but if you've had sexual trauma, if you've had a lack of support or financial support in your life, all of these pieces culminates as safety. And so what we unconsciously do is when we don't have enough safety in our life, we then try to control all the circumstances that we have to make sure that we stay safe. And so we keep attracting the same scenarios because we know the outcome for that. That's a way of staying safe. And so yeah, it's so true about what you said. Like you do take on other people's, but it's also because like attracts like. When we talk about the scale of consciousness by Dr. David R. Hawkins, I base a lot of my work on him and how it, like emotion stores in the body, on his work. And the one thing that, you know, I often will see is like women sitting in pride of like who they should be and what they have to build in the world and be all this. And right under pride is anger. It's usually pride's masking anger. So it's like, I wonder what could be of like, if you were just to be neutral and authentic and actually show who you fully are, how that could shift the dynamic from you moving from force into power. Because that's literally the difference between power and force, is like pride or like literally neutrality, authentic space. Like it's not about being all love and light. It's about how real can I get with the frequency that's at play for me, emotionally, physically, spiritually, because everything that wants to move through you, you could be getting the greatest downloads in the world connected to source. And if the body's holding trauma, it's also going to distort it. You're going to move it through in your own lens that's not clean for the person receiving it. So the cleaner you get your body, the cleaner you get your physical expression of self, the more that you can impact and show up for the world.
1,000,000%. So
Yeah.
beautifully said. I love that. And so, okay, now the question is, I know on everyone's minds, what are your favorite tips and tools or processes or thoughts that people can start to implement today to start
Yeah.
help unlocking that and working through that in their lives?
This is going to be a little bit, most people will tell you meditation and those sorts of things. And that's a yes, but that's a later practice, I personally believe. And I want to jump back to Alexander Lowen's work. So he's like a pioneer, early 1900s of bioenergetics and how that moves, like how energy moves through the body. And his three core principles that he believes everyone gets to start with are breathing, grounding, and vibration. So vibration is just movement of energy, right? So it could be as simple as like taking a few moments for deep belly breaths, taking your time with your breath and allowing yourself to have full presence with your body whilst you're standing barefoot on the ground and then deciding to go for a walk. Like it's as simple as really connecting back in with the stillness of life, because especially when we have such a fast-paced world, it is so easy for us to distract from what is true for us. We've got literally the scroll hole right at our fingertips. We've got, you know, TV on blaring constantly. We've got the stress of work, the stress of children, the stress of husbands and life and all the things. But it's like the more that you can come back to center, the quicker it's going to shift. And then once you actually cultivate a sense of like, you know, peace in the body, it's then moving from there. Now, for those who are highly carrying a lot of trauma and they're like, a fucking walk ain't gonna do it for me, apologies for swearing, but like if they're like, if you're thinking that, like straight, I would really start to just access the feeling in the body. Like, where is it? How does it want to move? Like, give it a voice, because all of this is just information. Energy in the body, emotions in the body are just information. They're just telling you something. And like, you know, if you've got a pain or if you've got something happening in the body, oh, what's this about? Like just getting really curious, because your own innate intelligence is so incredibly powerful. It might look like, oh, right now I want to scream. Cool, scream. Scream from the place that it's holding, the energy's holding. It might look like I want to dance. Cool, scream, dance, do the thing. It might look like I just want to cry and beat a pillow and bash something. Do that, because they're all healthy ways of channeling. Just don't do it to another person is my request on that one. But like, you know,
Yes.
all of these methods and modalities are just showing you how to clear your channel, because when your channel is cleared, then you can show up for the work, right? So it's like I'm talking from a very physical essence right now, because the body is in this. And like, you know, Peter Levine talks a lot around the reason why we get caught in these freeze responses in our life, in these fight patterns, in these appease, people pleasing emotions or freeze, is because we've often had a traumatic experience in our life and the body hasn't had room to fully discharge the experience. So it stays trapped. And so that now becomes a way in which we learn to move. And so, for example, I don't know if you've ever seen like an antelope or something like that, when they get chased down by something, when they get away, they shake. Like they get the trauma off their body, they get the energy off their body. We're not conditioned as humans to do that because we've been taught, stay still, don't be crazy, don't do the thing. But it's like even just a practice of like shaking the body out and just like you could be like in the shower, I'm just going to shake my body. That would be enough to start discharging energy. It's like all of it just wants to move. And the more that you're in touch with energy moving, the more you're going to be available for life. That's where vitality comes from. That's where our openness and our ability to receive comes from. As you said, it's so connected to receptivity. It is because when our body's blocked physically by all the stuff we've held on to because we think it's not safe to release, it impedes our absolute capacity for more. So, yeah.
Okay, so beautifully said again. I know I've said that a couple of times, but it's true. I mean, I think the physical component I think gets overlooked often, which is it's crazy because we are hearing a lot about movement and embodiment and things like that, but these tools of the shake really tapping into the innate wisdom of the body and what it's asking you. And with the emotions and things like that that are trapped, I always like to explain it as it's like everything is energy. You and I talk about that. We love that conversation. But everything in this entire universe is energetic. And so if we can think of our emotions as like an old movie that was playing, like it's an old
Mm,
storyline, an old movie that was like, okay, everybody show up to this role. Like you have this role, you have this role. These are our emotions. And we're done with that chapter of our life. We can give permission now that we're in a safe place. Maybe we weren't in safe place in childhood trauma or abuse patterns. Maybe there were certain circumstances that got stuck and we didn't realize that we were holding on to something. But to
mm,
designate that conversation like, oh, it's energy. I can let it be neutral. I can
mm,
let it go and then allow the energy and the emotions that are happening now to create this new movie. And what do I want to look like? There's so much empowerment in that. But it's
mm,
really the balance of not just the intention, but also I love that you work with the physical embodiment in your practice as well of the shaking it off, of listening to the intuitive. Like that's so
mm,
beautiful. And I do think incredible that everyone can tap into that
mm,
today. Even the practice of shaking it out or stepping in the grass. I mean, those are things that are so highly underrated. We talk about how simple they are, but it's true. It's so simple. That's what our bodies need because we're electrical, we're energetic. That's what our system needs to reset and
mm.
reharmonize with nature, with patterns that are supportive of us.
Yeah, you just sort of prompted something in my mind when you were saying that. It's like everyone wants to be, being able to access divine and, consciousness and all the things really, really like powerfully. But the thing that I guess the lens I like to see it from is like, if you were to look at a tree and how a tree grows, it's like the deeper the roots grow, the taller the tree stands. And it's like the more that you are available for the human experience, the more that the divine will actually come through you. Like, when we try and disconnect and dissociate from what your physical body is doing, the less you're going to be able to be with what's really happening. And like, I remember you and I talking about like, as much as, you are this, quantum dimensional shaman, it's like knowing how to implement and be with that in life, that is something so potent because I see a lot of people who they can't be like that. They're always out and they don't have any grounding in their life because it's like they get scared of the physical after being so highly bound in the quantum space. Does that make sense when I say that?
Yeah, 1,000,000%. And I think for me, what I've noticed is I thank you for seeing me and acknowledging. It's like I innately have known how juicy and good all of the exploration of this
Mm.
3D Earth experience. Like I wanted to taste everything. I jumped off cliffs, off out of trees, like I tasted paint, like literally anything. I was at the hospital so many times, just getting injured, from all the things I needed to try. And, the
Yeah.
parties and the different chapters of life and the relationships, like I wanted to try and taste it all. And I still do. But when I've gone through periods of trauma in adulthood, that is where, for me, I started getting frozen in my physical body. And I didn't know how to come back into my physical safety because I really never understood my relationship to my body previously because I do have that outer connection. It was so natural. And also my desire of wanting to be human, like have this experience, getting to try all the things. I knew it was a part of my story. And so I
Yeah.
think it's so important when people talk about, I want to clear, I want to raise my vibration, I want to like move into ascension, into other dimensions. That's amazing. But this earth experience, this density gifts us so many things, including the gift of getting to work through freeze patterns, trauma, like all of those challenges that break us apart and break us open. Like they're beautiful gifts. And
Mm.
understanding, like, as what you've said, the regulation in our body to get to come back in and fully have that, fully be a vessel of
Mm.
creator of the whole universe.
And
Like, that is so good.
so good. And my whole thing in life is like, how much joy can I experience? Like, how much can my body open itself to joy? Because it's like, when you think about it, I personally have this belief, and I heard it somewhere. I can't remember where I heard it from, but it was in one of my many of studies somewhere along the lines. But, the human experience is purely an invitation to experience desire. And so when we look at it from a wide lens, right, it's like often we don't know what we want until we've experienced something we don't want, right? So if the ultimate human experience is to,
Amen. Like,
yeah,
amen.
like like I didn't know I wanted a healthy man until I had a really unhealthy one, like, right? Like, but it's like when you allow yourself to look at the wide landscape of like, why did I experience this? It's so easy to like victimize ourselves and be like, why me, poor me, all the things. And this is where it's like, it's not to bypass it, but it's also like, if there's something bigger for me, like another desire on the other side of this, I have to be willing to tap in. And I always talk about this three planes always at play. This is like in my body of work. It's like the spiritual plane, the mental plane, and the physical plane. And the way that I like to play with it is like, it's like an everlasting, like, infinite life. And it's like the spiritual plane, the bigger you play in the spiritual plane, the bigger everything else opens up for you. But if you only play in the physical plane, you will literally create a prison cell for yourself. But the thing that like stops both of them from working harmoniously together, I can never say that word properly, is your mental plane, your mind, your ego that gets in the way. So when you can quieten that bit down, you can start to move through life in a really beautiful way and it can flow. Like for me, I'm like, when I look at it from that lens, if I can experience something in the physical and then go, okay, cool, let me move through this so I can understand why it was here and the desire that was at play for me, it was huge. So, and just to give a really, really finite example of that, was I grew up in poverty. Like I was born into like highs and lows. Like because my parents had moments of drug dealing, we had massive influxes of cash at sometimes. And then it was like the next week we're getting donated food because we don't have anything like in the cupboards, right? It was literally like moments to moment like that, like in, out, in, out, in, out financially. And what that taught me was actually I have a desire to create so much wealth that my son never has to worry about what it's like to be hungry. My son never has to worry about whether or not he can do a class that he wanted to do in school or a sport that he wanted to do because I can't afford it. Like I want him to know that he can have desires met as well. And so he'll get some other learning because I feel like every human goes through every experience to understand a desire. So he's going to get fucked up along the way too. I can't protect him from that, but I do know that his experience will be there to activate whatever his life path is and the desire is in the human physical form.
Yes. So, okay. So there's like so many things in this I want to get back to, but I think the thing that I really want to kind of circle back for a second that you said, you were talking about the physical, mental, spiritual plane and talking about that when we only live in the physical, it really becomes a cell, a gel cell, right? that really speaks to especially the lessons that you learned in the 3D environment that you were trying to create, that hustle, that overachiever. No matter how much you achieve, it finds some way to dismantle and break apart. Or, like, I know for myself, I spent times creating massively through, my spiritual gifts and things like that. It was like magnetic and attraction and using frequency. But the way that I was embodying it was only stuck in like this 3D lifestyle. I
Yeah.
felt like I was dying inside. I felt like I was dying a very slow death, and everything looked so beautiful. And I
Mm.
was screaming to get out from the inside because it was so misaligned to who I am. And for you, that translated to physical breakdown, right? To then
Mm.
the emotional breakdown of all the different challenges and things like that. But I just wanted to like circle back to that and acknowledge what you're saying and really highlight that as well.
I think this is such a big piece too. Like I speak to a lot of people who have made millions. Like some of my clients, they've done such big things in the world, and they're like, for what? Like that's their question. Like even my father, you know, he is multi-millionaire, got this huge company, and struggles with alcoholism. Like he's very open, and we share a very good relationship with him, trying to move away from that. And it's because I spent so much in the physical world, hustle, 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 got to make it, got to prove my worth, essentially, only to feel empty on the inside. Because until you start playing the inside out game, nothing externally is going to feel valid. Because if you don't love yourself, if you're not connected to the God within, like the person who is here, that is the divine in you, this just becomes a meat suit and everything's fucking empty. Like, and so it's like when we allow ourselves to really be with the entirety of the picture, like, I've had moments where I've come out of ayahuasca ceremonies and I'm like, oh my God, in a previous life we were this and this all makes sense now and everything's good. And I remember the first time I sat in, I didn't know how to ground it into my life. I was like, everything has to change now. Got to get rid of this, I've got to do this, got to do this. And there was no actual structure for me to be like, how can I just live and breathe these learnings now rather than having to throw everything out the window? And so the second time I went in and I sat with medicine, I swear I've sat with every kind of fucking medicine that you could possibly think of, right? Chasing that connection, chasing that high. And the second time I went in, I came out with like a deep trust of knowing where my path was and knowing that I was choosing something. And so it was like I had this whole experience where we lived in another planet and we were all spiders and we came to Earth and our whole thing is here to weave the web of love and connect back in. And it had all these people from all over the world that I knew, and they were all part of this big thing. And we were just seeing how long it would take for us to all connect back together. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever experienced. And it was like, how can I now see that as like, yes, if it was real, amazing, but also let it be a metaphor for what I'm actually living and breathing in my life. That's where we get to really play and implement the quantum of like, how do I be with it in the physical presence? So that way I am the walking, living, breathing embodiment of what my psyche wants to tell me, what my subconscious is constantly playing with, what my quantum being is actually fucking here for. Like for me, that's where I get really excited.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. The things that like I see as you're saying this is how all of the different points and places of your life and your experience really brought that into concrete direction for you. So it's really interesting. A lot of times we feel bad or kind of step aside, or stuff aside, I would say, the things that we go through at different points and say, oh, I've outgrown that. Oh, I'm better than this. But when we really look back through a different lens of, gratitude for the chapters that we've had, like I can see for you all the different connected pieces that led you to this realization, to this embodiment, to this like freedom that you have in yourself. And also kind of leaping into the second point is going back to what you just said with the embodiment of what you were learning with ayahuasca or the different plant ceremonies that you were a part of. The way to integrate that goes back to that same piece that you were talking about earlier with like thinking that the creator is outside and not
Mm.
acknowledging like I think that in all of these different concepts of quantum dimensional living, of the things that we learn, the embodiment, we feel like it's somehow categorized as though like the density of our meat suit, like we forget we're just energetic beings walking around. Like it is the outside, the inside, it's all energy. So it's like we are the creator within, it's external. And so that's going back to, exactly
Mm.
the same realization of what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and none of it's separate. I swear I say it like 10 times a day. Everything touches everything. And like, if there's God in me and I know that God is in me, how can I sit there and say that there's not God in someone else? How can I deny that bit? Like, I believe like we are all, there's God in everything. There's God in this coffee cup. There is God in my phone. Like, I personally believe that there is an innate intelligence that lies within everything. And sometimes that's not going to feel like love and light and purity and all the things. But that's also because there is duality. The law of duality exists, and that creates desire that allows us to move. And so when we start to look at the distortions of the laws of oneness and how it's all created, we open up on a really, really big scale. Like, I love playing with the universal laws and how they just interact with who we're being on a regular basis. Because when you start to think about it, like one of my favorite laws to play with is the law of correspondence. And the way that I do that is I just look at like, how am I, what's showing up in my world? Because that's all corresponding to how I'm being. And so if like I'm constantly getting really rude people coming at me, I'm like, oh, how have I presented myself to the world?
Like,
Because
what
if,
kind of fucking attitude are you throwing around?
yeah, like, are you just walking around with like your resting like horrible bitch face on or something? Like, what is it? And so, and when I notice things like that, for example, if someone's angry coming at me, all I do is just shift my energy straight away and I'll move into a smile or I'll soften, and it changes the whole dynamic of it. Like, it changes the whole way in which it is. And so this is, I'm still deep in this work. I'm not masterful in any way with this, like, but it's just a forever learning practice of like, who am I being moment to moment? Like, I know I could, I could walk off this podcast and be a completely different woman again within 2 minutes, knowing that who I'm being is who I'm choosing moment to moment to moment to moment.
It goes back to, energetic responsibility and intelligence, right? Like we are starting to tap into understanding emotional intelligence, but it's also energetic intelligence. We were talking earlier, you were saying something, and I was really enjoying. I can always see like our oneness, and then it's really fun to tap in and see and look at the story like, oh, well, what's Case do? Like you were talking about your childhood, and I'm like, wow, like that's an interesting expression to live. Like your experience in childhood, like, ooh, that must have
Mm.
been really interesting to live. But so
Mm.
understanding like our oneness, that like you and I are literally the same, but we're choosing expressions in different ways. And there's such beauty and freedom in that, right? Like it really opens the door to get to love people so much bigger and more deeply, including ourselves.
Yeah, I love there's a book, Your Life's Work by Stephen Cope. I remember reading it years and years ago before I fully got this lens. And he talks about the dharmic path that we walk essentially. And it's like how, it might not have made sense. Like back in the day, I was an apprentice chef, right? Like for like 6 months. And it doesn't make sense when you look at what I've walked. Like you could be like, oh, that was a throwaway job if you want to look at it through that lens. But the skill set that I developed as an apprentice chef has helped me in motherhood. Like, there's so many different avenues of life that connect and create betterment for everyone. Like even like when I do in-person immersions a lot with my clients. And I'm so particular on food. Like for me, presentation of food, and I know that that's back to when I was an apprentice chef, right? And so like when we do these events, I've got like one of our friends is a private chef, and so he'll come in, I hire him, and he comes in and he cooks these elaborate meals. But the reason why it's him that does it and not just someone else is because like I see the way he presents. And I remember when I was an apprentice chef, hearing the statement from my head chef at the time, like 90% of people eat with their eyes. They eat with what they're seeing. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. And so I've spent my whole life now curating food that looks so good to my eyes because of those particular experiences and how it's just played such a massive role through my life. It's not connected to work and like apart from how it's in my immersions, but on a general consensus, everything has a place. Everything weaves its magic and its energy through life.
Absolutely. And I think the more that we can just pause and go back into the embodiment pieces that you were talking about earlier, I think even in the healing journey, it really makes those healing moments even more potent when you
Mm.
can honor and accept like the wholeness and the beauty of that journey that you are weaving and living, and I love your ayahuasca, like vision of the web that we weave. Very profound, very true, I think. Well, I know we could keep going on and on about so many different pieces, but to wrap up, I do have one question for you that I would love for you to share because I know that you do a lot with alignment activation with your
Yeah.
clients. So for anyone listening, I see people a lot that are aligning to other people's alignment. And what I mean by that is like, especially in the Instagram social media space or coaching space, it's like, it's really easy to get wrapped up and caught up in the alignment or the story or the journey of someone you admire or see, or it like pings something for you. What are the tips that you would share, or what's like a message that's coming through for you to share on really honing in on that personal alignment?
Well, the first thing I would say is there is a massive difference between alignment and hype. And this was a really big lesson for me personally. Like I was seeing, these huge entrepreneurs who were earning millions, and I was like, oh my God, I've got to be in their space because they have the message. And then I went and marketed my business exactly how they marketed it, and it didn't work. It really didn't work for me because that was not my authentic expression. And so for me, when it comes to really like choosing who you're going to be mentored by or who you're going to be in the field of, the one thing I would always say is like, do they make me feel more at peace with being myself, or do they take me out of that? And like what I mean by that is like, do I feel like I have to be like them? Because if I feel like I have to be like someone else, then you're taking me out of my authentic expression. And so I have a rule, like if there's anyone in my feed or in my space where I feel like there's any energy of competition, I will unfollow them. And it's not because I don't like them. It's not because of anything. It's because I always want my expression to be me, my version of me. I don't want it filtered because someone else has said something and now I've got to filter my work this way, or I've got to make it sound like someone else's. Like I know I have a very different standpoint in the market, and I talk a lot deeply, a lot differently to a lot of people. And like, it's not, I don't have this huge, humongous business where there's multiple seven figures coming in, but I am making multiple six figures and feeling really good. And I'm home with my baby and I have time, and I'm literally living the version of success that feels really good for me. And I don't want that filtered by someone being like, you have to make this much money to be successful, or you have to be a certain way to consider yourself successful. Because I feel like, when we look at success, like true success, does that create peace in your body? That's the thing that you want to land in. Like for me, nervous system work and this level of work, and this is essentially what I'm doing. Like there's so much hype around nervous system work that is all a bunch of jargon, and there's real nervous system work. Nervous system work is going to stretch your capacity, but it also gets to bring you back into your authentic self. And if you can't land in that space of feeling like, yes, this is where I'm at, even if it feels scary, even if it feels like, oh, I don't know my next move. Like, you and I have talked about like me potentially moving to America. And right now my body's like, this is the scariest thing on the whole planet. And I'm really sitting with, is this the next step for me from a place of alignment, as opposed to I should do this just to grow? Like, it's really like knowing that for yourself, because you won't always feel regulated and the right people won't always regulate you. Like sometimes your lesson is learning how to regulate with them, and I just want to land on this one piece as well, is like so many of us, we do everything so solo, and especially with the way that the online space can be directed is still the solo entrepreneur. It's like most of our wounds happen in community. So we need to find communities that actually activate our authentic self, because that's where we will heal. Communities that allow all of you to come through. So yeah, when it comes to really like when I talk like alignment, energetic alignment, really coming back in, what I'm looking at is the frequency in which you hold yourself. Like if you're feeling shameful for the way that you've shown up in business, that's not going to create an entourage of clients wanting to come into you. All that's going to do is you downplay the magic and the message that's on your heart. So it's like you've got to have someone that allows you to open up as opposed to contract and shut down.
Oh, good. That is so good. I love especially what you said about unfollowing people that make you feel contracted because you can love them, but it really is about aligning to mentors, coaches, programs, or even if you're outside the coaching and entrepreneur space. I mean, aligning to friends and activities and community that really activate your authentic self versus making you step outside of that. So,
Yeah.
so beautifully said. Oh my goodness, Case, like it is just such an honor to have you on the podcast as well to get to know you and develop this friendship. I don't even know how our paths cross, but I'm so glad that they do. It feels like magic. And
Yeah.
you're just such a light. And I'm rooting for you to come to the US too. But also, if you stay, like I will see you also in Australia. So in either
Well,
way, it's good.
I'm coming in to Austin in January regardless, but whether I live there is a question. So
Yeah, totally. Okay, so share with everyone listening. I know you've got some incredible programs. How can they connect with you? We will also add this in the show notes so that you guys don't miss at all anything coming online with Case, but share with us what's happening in your world.
you can find me on Instagram mostly. It's just Case Warwick at Case Warwick. So that's the best way to connect with me, to chat with me, to, whatever. But what I've got coming up is I'm actually about to launch. I'm not sure when this is launching, but I've got a free 5-day masterclass coming up so people can really play in their business. If you want to come in my world for free, that's a great way to do that.
What are the dates for that?
So that will be November, I think it's November 25 to 29.
Okay.
So Americans, it will be 24 to 28. Um, yeah, I've got my Embodied Business Mastermind. So this is where we go really deep in all of this. So you can join that at any time. And for those of you who want to come and experience this in person, that's what I'm traveling to the US for. I work alongside Preston Smiles and Alexi Penos in the Bridge Experience and Extreme Leadership. So that's like workshops where we go really, really deep in this space. So you can also find me there playing in this world. So depending on whether you want to be with me for a short time or a long time, there's lots of options. So
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here. And everyone, make sure to go and connect with Case in her world. You won't regret it.
yeah, thank you so much. I so appreciate this conversation.
See you soon.
See you soon, babe.